Have you ever felt completely alone, as if you were lost in the desert with no one by your side? Have you ever stopped to think that this loneliness might be the greatest sign that God is at work in your life? What seems like abandonment may actually be divine separation. You may be called to something extraordinary, something that can only be revealed in silence. Why would God allow you to face emptiness? What is the purpose of this isolation? Today I'm going to show you how solitude is not a punishment, but a spiritual training. A time when the Father shapes, strengthens, and prepares the chosen ones for greater purposes. Stay with me to the end of this video and discover how God uses solitude to turn pain into strength, rejection into protection, and silence into a deep connection with Him. This could be the turning point you've been waiting for. Have you ever felt surrounded by a silence that seems to speak louder than any voice? As if everything around you has drifted away, leaving you alone with your thoughts? This emptiness, which sometimes seems unbearable, is something that many people avoid facing. But it is in this emptiness that the greatest treasures of spiritual life are hidden. Contrary to appearances, loneliness is not abandonment. It could be God calling you to a unique and transforming encounter. When you feel isolated, it's easy to think that you've done something wrong or that you're being punished. But I tell you, what if this moment is the greatest gift the Father can give you? Isolation allows us to hear what we normally can't hear in the noise of everyday life. It's when everything around us is silent that we begin to discern the gentle voice of the Spirit leading us to something greater. Often God has to remove all distractions so that we can understand the purpose He has for us. Consider the great moments recorded in history. Moses spent years in the desert in silence before leading the people. Elijah heard God's presence not in thunder, but in the gentle mountain breeze. Even when I walked among you, it was in solitude that I found the strength to go on. Solitude is not punishment, it is preparation. It is the place where we are formed, where our doubts are transformed into faith. Imagine a seed planted in dark soil. For a while it seems forgotten, and no one notices its existence. But it is in this hiding place that it gains the strength to sprout and later become a tree. In the same way, your loneliness is the ground where God is planting something new, something that will blossom when the time is right. What seems to be the end is actually a new beginning. And so, in this silence, you begin to notice something different. Little signs that show that God is present, even when everything seems empty. It's not easy to accept this phase, but you have to understand that every detail has a purpose. Little by little, what seemed empty becomes a place of encounter and transformation. And it is in this process that we discover that we are not alone, but separated for something special. Have you ever considered that loneliness might be God's way of preparing you for something greater? The silence you feel can be like the field where your faith is strengthened and your character is honed. When God separates someone, He is saying, I have a plan for you, but first, I must prepare you. Just as the potter carefully shapes the clay, God uses moments of isolation to refine you. The desert, a place often mentioned in spiritual history, is the perfect place to understand this. It was in the desert that Moses learned to trust the Father before leading the people into freedom. It was there that David faced his greatest inner challenges before becoming king, while tending to his family's sheep. And even I, when I was away from the crowds, found the strength to carry out my mission in silence. Solitude is the place where the most profound lessons are taught. When you're alone, there's no place to hide your weaknesses. That's when God begins to work on areas that need healing, transformation, and strengthening. Pride, impatience, fear. These are all exposed, not to humiliate you, but to transform you. Just as a warrior must train away from the eyes of the world before facing battles, time in solitude is the spiritual training that prepares you for the great responsibilities ahead. In addition, solitude allows you to hear God clearly. In the hustle and bustle of everyday life, it's easy to ignore or confuse the voice of the Spirit. In silence, however, you recognize the wisdom He wants to share with you. It's not a punishment, but an opportunity for growth. Every prayer, every doubt, every tear is a step that brings you closer to understanding the divine purpose. And as you go through this process, something begins to change. What once seemed empty begins to be filled with a new perspective. You realize that even in the silence, God is present. He is preparing you, molding your heart, and strengthening your faith. What seemed like loneliness begins to reveal a greater purpose, and that is what connects us to the next stage of this journey of preparation and trust. When God separates you, He is not just taking you away from the noise, He is inviting you into a deep dialogue. This is the moment when the distractions of life lose their power, and you begin to hear something that has always been there: the loving and wise voice of the Father. This call to solitude is often misunderstood as abandonment, but I assure you that it is quite the opposite. God wants to speak directly to you, to reveal what can only be understood in silence. Think about how difficult it is to discern what's really important in the midst of so many voices around us. It's like being in a room full of people talking at the same time. You hear sounds, but you don't understand the message. Now imagine that room emptying out until there is only one voice left, clear and calm. That's the purpose of separation, to create the space you need to hear divine wisdom without interference. It's common for people to feel fear or anxiety when they are separated from their routines, their support networks, or even their own plans. But it is in these moments that God builds something special. Through solitude, He reveals answers that would not otherwise be discernible. Sometimes the Father has to take us away from what we think we need in order to show us what really matters. Remember, too, that separation doesn't mean that God is distant. In fact, the opposite is true. He is closer than ever, ready to reveal secrets that will transform your life. Just as a teacher takes a moment of individual attention to teach a student something important, God uses these times to reveal His heart. It is in this space that you understand that you are not alone, that you are being guided and formed. And as you listen, something begins to shift. You realize that even without fully understanding, there is a peace that begins to take hold. It's the certainty that the Father is guiding you, even when the path seems uncertain. This realization opens the way to a new understanding of what it really means to be protected, even in moments of rejection and challenges that arise along the way. Rejection is one of the most painful experiences we face. When we are left out, ignored, or discredited, the heart asks itself, why? What did I do wrong? But I tell you, what if that rejection is actually God's loving hand protecting you from something you can't see right now? Sometimes what seems like a closed door is actually a detour to a safer and more blessed path. Think about how many times rejection has made you doubt yourself. The temptation to blame yourself or question your worth can be overwhelming. But God doesn't see the world as humans do. He knows of hidden dangers, of paths that could lead you astray from your greater destiny. That's why the Father allows some people or opportunities to pass you by, even if it seems like a hard blow at the time. I've seen it so many times. People who were rejected, but later realized that if they had followed that path, they would have been lost. It's like a mother who won't let her child play near a cliff, even if the child cries or complains. Rejection is often the invisible protection that keeps you from falling where you couldn't get up. And when those you loved or trusted turn their backs, remember that God is preparing another circle for your life. Not everyone can walk with you where He wants to take you. Sometimes He has to separate you from influences that would hinder your growth or even block the purpose for which you were created. He builds a new structure around you, a new foundation. As time goes on, you realize that the doors that closed were God's way of opening others that you could never have imagined. And this brings us to an important consideration. What happens when you realize that there are signs that God is preparing you for something much greater? These moments, when seen through the eyes of faith, bring new meaning to every challenge you face. How do you know when God is setting you apart for something special? Maybe you've noticed that certain people have moved away, opportunities have disappeared, or the world around you has suddenly changed. This doesn't happen by accident. There are clear signs that the Father is quietly working in your life, preparing you for something great that can only be revealed at the right time. One of the most obvious signs is when situations that once seemed secure begin to fall apart. The friendship that seemed unshakable drifts apart, the job that seemed stable ends, or the well-structured plans simply don't work out. These unexpected changes can be frightening, but they are an invitation to trust God to lead you to a higher purpose. What looks like chaos is actually the beginning of new construction. Another sign is inner discomfort, the feeling that you no longer belong to the place or people that used to make sense. It's as if something inside you is crying out for change, for a new path. This restlessness is not a mistake, but an indication that God is calling you to leave where you are and move toward what He has planned. You may also notice a change in the way you see things. What was once important may lose its luster, and your values begin to align more with divine principles. You may feel more drawn to moments of silence, prayer, or spiritual searching. These are signs that God is refining you, adjusting your heart and mind to something greater. There is also a sense of protection, even in the midst of confusion. You realize that despite the challenges and losses, there is a greater power that sustains you. Every door that closes seems inexplicable, but you soon understand that it was for your own good. God's presence becomes more evident, even when the path is still unclear. And as these signs become clearer, the question arises, what do you do when you realize that God is working in such a specific way? It is at this point that we understand the greater purpose of the desert and the trials it presents, something that leads us to a deeper and more transformative place of trust. The desert, in the spiritual journey, has always been a place of transformation. It's not just a place of isolation, but an environment where distractions are left behind, and all that's left is you and God. It may seem like a barren place where nothing grows, but it is there that the deepest roots of faith begin to form. The desert of solitude is not a punishment. It is a preparation for something beyond what you can imagine. When you cross this desert, your view of life begins to change. What once seemed essential now loses its value. It's a place where the ego is confronted, where you realize that your strength does not come from your own abilities, but from the power of the Father. It is where Moses heard God's voice in the burning bush, where Elijah found the courage to continue his mission, and where even I, by retreating into silence, found the clarity I needed to fulfill the greater purpose. In the wilderness, God not only removes what is unnecessary, but also reveals what is eternal. It's a learning space where you begin to see with the eyes of faith. When everything seems empty, you realize that something greater supports your every step. Every difficulty you face in this place becomes a tool for building your character, strengthening your patience, and deepening your trust. The desert is also the place where you learn to listen. The silence that once seemed frightening begins to reveal a divine melody. God uses this time to teach lessons that cannot be learned in the noise of the world. It is in this space that He whispers words of direction, comfort, and purpose. The wilderness is not the end, but the beginning of something new and transformative. And as you go through this phase, you begin to realize something extraordinary. The pain and challenges of the desert are part of a greater plan. Every step, every tear, every prayer is like a seed planted in fertile soil. And when the time is right, they blossom, showing that even the desert can be a place of life and abundance. Here we understand how God turns pain into strength, something we'll look at in more detail later. Pain is an experience that no one wants to face, but it is inevitable on our journey. What we often forget is that God never allows us to go through difficulties without a purpose. He takes the most difficult moments of our lives and uses them to build something great in us. Suffering is not the end. It is the soil in which spiritual strength is cultivated. Think of a tree growing in the midst of a storm. It faces strong winds, heavy rains, and even periods of drought. But over time, its roots deepen, making it stronger and more resilient. So it is with pain in your life. It challenges you, it exposes your weaknesses, but at the same time it allows your spiritual roots to deepen in trust in God. In the process, you discover a strength you never imagined you possessed. In the midst of pain, you begin to realize something extraordinary. God never leaves you alone. Even in the moments when all seems lost, He is there to guide, comfort, and shape you. Every tear you shed is seen by Him, every prayer is heard, and every struggle is turned into a learning experience. What seemed like an unbearable burden becomes a springboard to a new level of faith and spiritual maturity. In addition, God uses your pain to bless others. The wounds you carry can become healing for someone facing a similar struggle. What seemed to be just suffering becomes a powerful testimony, a source of inspiration and encouragement to those who are still in the midst of the battle. God transforms your scars into a reminder of His faithfulness and restorative power. And so you realize that the pain was not in vain. It has prepared you for greater challenges, for deeper purposes. Every difficulty you have faced has shaped you, stripping away the superficial and strengthening the essential. And when you look back, you see that the strength you now carry is not yours, but that of the Father who has been by your side every step of the way. This realization leads us to an even deeper reflection. Even in the darkest moments, God never abandons you, something we'll explore in the next point. At times when everything seems dark and empty, it's natural to feel that God is far away. When we face silence, pain, or loneliness, doubt can loom like a shadow, asking us, is He really with me? But I tell you with all certainty, God never abandons you. Even when the path seems uncertain, His presence is constant, silent, and firm. Imagine a father walking beside his son in a dark forest. The child may not see his father at times, but he is there, watching every step, ready to protect him at any sign of danger. That's how God is with you. He is always there, even when you don't realize it. The emptiness you feel may just be preparation for something greater, a moment when He expects you to trust Him wholeheartedly. In times of silence, God works in areas you can't see. He is adjusting circumstances, shaping your character, and strengthening your faith. It's easy to think He has forgotten you, but in fact, He is closer than ever. This apparent emptiness is like the pause before a song begins again. It's the moment when something beautiful is being prepared. Have you ever noticed that the moments of greatest pain or doubt are the moments when we find the deepest answers? When you finally surrender and give everything to God, you realize that He has been there all along, waiting for you to trust Him completely. Every tear, every prayer, every cry has been heard. He not only sees your struggle, but He walks beside you, sustaining you when your strength seems exhausted. And it is at this point that you begin to notice a transformation. The void is no longer a place of fear, but of encounter. You feel the peace that only He can give, even if you don't fully understand the path ahead. This encounter changes the way you see loneliness, not as abandonment, but as a divine opportunity to connect with the Father in a more intimate way. And then you discover that loneliness can actually be a gift. At first glance, loneliness can seem like a punishment, an emptiness that consumes and weakens. But it's actually one of the greatest gifts that God can give. It is a unique opportunity to look beyond the distractions of life, to know yourself more deeply, and to hear the divine voice that is often drowned out by the noise of the world. When you begin to see solitude from this perspective, something within you changes. Think of a sculptor who takes a rough stone and patiently begins to shape it. He sees the hidden potential where others see only an ordinary stone. That's how God is with you in moments of isolation. He is sculpting something precious, refining what is essential so that you become the masterpiece He has planned. Without silence, without the time to be alone, this transformation would not be possible. Solitude is also a space where you learn to trust in what really matters. Without depending on other people, opinions, or external circumstances, you discover that God is enough. He fills the spaces that once seemed empty and reveals Himself as the source of all that you need. In this encounter, you realize that what seemed like absence is actually a deeper and more transforming presence. In addition, moments of solitude are a chance to reconnect with yourself. Often we live so focused on fulfilling expectations or meeting external demands that we forget who we really are. In silence, God invites us to remember our worth, not for what we do or what we accomplish, but for the simple fact that we are loved by Him. This is a gift that no circumstance can take away from you. And as you embrace this vision, you begin to realize that loneliness is not the end, but the beginning of something new. It prepares the ground for you to blossom, to find purpose and strength in God. It is in this space that the chosen ones are prepared in silence, ready to fulfill the mission the Father has for them. Silence is the space where God shapes those He chooses for greater purposes. No wonder that the greatest journeys begin in moments of solitude and silence. It was in the desert that Moses received the revelation of his mission to free his people. It was in the silence of the cave that Elijah found God's voice like a gentle breeze. It is in this environment of apparent tranquility that the Father separates, refines, and strengthens the hearts of those He calls chosen. Being chosen by God does not mean a life without challenges. On the contrary, it is a life of preparation. And this preparation often takes place away from the eyes of the world. Silence is not empty, but full of meaning. It is the place where God works in the invisible, adjusting what needs to be changed, removing what doesn't fit, and strengthening what is essential. It is a divine workshop where your faith is tested and your character is built. During this process, you may feel alone, but the truth is that God is closer than ever. He places you in a space where the noise of the world can no longer distract you, where the opinions of others don't interfere, and where you can hear the direction that comes from Him. This silence is a privilege, an opportunity to be taught directly by the Creator. Silence also reveals your true self. It exposes your weaknesses and limitations, not to condemn you, but to help you see where you need to grow. God doesn't choose the strongest or the most skilled. He chooses those who are willing to be formed in silence. It is in this space of vulnerability that He empowers those He calls, giving them the courage and wisdom to fulfill the mission entrusted to them. When the time is right, those who have been prepared in silence are called to act. And in that moment you realize that every moment of solitude, every challenge you have faced, every prayer you have prayed with tears, has had a purpose. You have been formed to be a light, to be an example, to be a witness of God's love and grace in the world. When God separates the elect, He doesn't abandon them. He prepares them. Every silence, every tear, every struggle is a stepping stone that He uses to lift you up to the destiny that only He can see. What seemed like loneliness was actually the Father calling you closer, molding your heart, strengthening your faith, and breathing life into your deepest dreams. Remember, the wilderness is not the final destination, but the way to the promise. You have been called to be light in a world of darkness, to bring hope where there is pain, and to live the truth that God has planted in your spirit. So trust. The Father leaves no work unfinished. May you walk with courage, knowing that you have been chosen, loved, and prepared by the Creator Himself. And may your life be a testimony that God is always present, even in silence. Go in peace, and may divine love guide your every step.